In the Ten Commandments, God gave instructions for relationship with Him and guidelines for maintaining healthy relationships with others. In our session today, we will see that this great portion of Scripture reveals how we should treat God as well as other people. The Pentateuch contains 613 different laws. Fortunately, these are summarized succinctly in the Ten Commandments. Jesus further reduced them down to just two: love the Lord, and that was Mark 12:30, and love your neighbor, Mark 12:31. These two statements identify the two basic parts of the Ten Commandments. The first four commandments tell us how to love God, while the last six describe how to love others. Of the first four commandments, the most challenging might be the first one: having no other gods before me. If God does not remain the primary object of our affection, keeping the other commandments does not really matter that much. The command not to make for yourself any image might seem relatively easy for Christians today, but we can idolize such things as money, other people, status, etc., and sacrifice a great deal for them, making them like a god to us. Disrespecting God by using His name casually can also be a challenge. To use God's name disrespectfully ultimately insults Him. And finally, stopping long enough to really connect with God becomes difficult for many in our world. That's commandment number 4. God asks His people to choose time with Him over other things. Then there's some basic rules for maintaining strong relationships with others, commandments 5 through 10. And ultimately, these rules serve to maintain and grow our relationship with God. So again, we have the two versions of the Ten Commandments, 3 versions if you count the Isaac Watts summary, and that's the context we will use as we discuss rules and relationship today. The first question asks us to think about other Israelites who worship other gods and to elaborate on who and the gods they worship. I will get started, teacher's prerogative. While Moses was doing the Sinai thing, they were putting their jewelry together and creating an idol, the golden calf. So at the time that God was speaking, saying, here's what I want you to do, the people were thinking, we want to do something else. Remember, they spent 400 years disorganized in terms of being religious. So there wasn't that focus around Yahweh. And as a result, they probably mixed whatever they remembered with what was happening in Egypt. And we know that they were told when they conquer the land that they were to get rid of everything that was there so they can restart, but they coexisted among Canaanites, and the Canaanites continued to have their gods and goddesses, and therefore there was a possibility of a lot of intermixing, and therefore worshiping gods that were not Yahweh. So again, can you think of others who worshiped other gods? And you don't have to stay within Judah. You can go to Israel as well, because it says Israelites. Can you think of kings who may have decided they wanted to extend the worship?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, we want to focus on more closely related to the Israelites.
Oh,
So who else can you think of?
Pharaoh.
Okay.
Well, one of the kings of Israel made another golden calf
Mm-hmm.
years later.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember which one.
I
Not
mean-
Asa, but his father.
And we know of the Baals being worshipped
In Asherah.
in
Yeah.
Asherah, and the intermarriages when you go and you marry a princess of another religion, and therefore she gets to dominate, Ahab and Jezebel, as an example. Just want to broaden the context, and it's not a fair question to spring on you if you haven't had time to think about it. But we're saying the point is that even though Israel is presented as monotheistic, it doesn't mean that there wasn't the practice that existed prior to Sinai and continuing into Canaan, where we have different thoughts. Let's fast forward. And I'm not asking anyone to answer this question because I don't really need to play therapist today. But at some point in your past, have you, don't answer please, have you toyed with the idea of other gods? And it need not be something religious. It could be a thing or a person, something that you idolize that made it like, okay, I'm going to put this on the level with God.
Well, I think there are people in our communities who worship money. Worship money.
Money, yes, yes, yes.
And, or an athlete,
Mm-hmm.
but, personally, I don't do that.
Yes.
Or who worship position.
Yes.
Power.
Mm-hmm. I need the conversation to go. We're not going to bunt. We're going to swing and hit home run.
Or they worship, they're part of a fan club for an actor or actress.
People worship possessions too. Who has the most toys wins.
There are also individuals who, in the modern realm, might perceive that it's okay to think that more than one religion is acceptable. In other words, all religions have some kind of equality. Okay, you do your thing, I do my thing. And as a result, we get into that idea. You might not actually actively do it, but you do not say, this is what the Bible says. So we no longer hold on to the evangelizing about who God is. Because we say, okay, well, people have their own religions. And it's a sticky wicket, to use a cricket term. If you have to go into another person's culture and figure out you're going to be aggressive in your Christianity as you try to witness to them. Oh, what you guys have worshipped all these years is wrong. And so one has to have either some gifting, some talent, some education. How do you engage with those who are of a different faith when you firmly believe what? Sorry?
You take the Paul Mars Hill approach.
Yes, if there's a Mars Hill.
You been there, Cheryl?
But many of us don't get that occasion.
Can you explain that?
So when Paul left Thessalonica, he was chased out of Thessalonica, he went down to Greece. And the first city he ended up in was Athens. And then Mars Hill was a location where people gathered together and they discussed multiple gods. And it was just like the town square for these high-level conversations. If you were not intelligent, you were probably not allowed in the crowd. And they had altars to different gods. And there was one altar to the unknown God. In other words, in case we have left out a God, let's have an altar to the God who we forgot, so to speak, the unknown God. And when Paul saw that, he carpe diem, he seized the moment and says, aha, I see that you worship many gods and you have this altar to the God you don't know. Let me tell you what that God you don't know. It was a carpe diem, seize the moment. And he saw that and he told them about God based on that. So that is the background. Sometimes we speak in a language that we need to elaborate on, so I'm glad I had the chance to show off my little bit of knowledge, teeny bit of knowledge,
Yeah.
Mars Hill. Okay, question number 2. Why might they have been tempted to worship other gods?
Since they were slaves, it's not really an employer, but an owner who said, on Saturday at 10 o'clock, we're having a meeting, and you want to come to it, and we're going to be worshiping this God. And who knows what went on in those days. So,
I loved how you did that. Creative.
Might have been for comfort if they were missing, even though it was rough in Egypt. You know, that was their way of life. So it was hard in the desert.
Mhm.
Maybe they, even though it was hard in Egypt, maybe out of comfort or they just
Do you
defaulted
think
to.
that people were confused because there were so many different gods that they worshiped, that they really didn't know which was the true God to
So-
worship?
I would answer that in the terms of today. Are people confused
Yes.
because don't know what truth is. I would say that a lot of people are searching for truth, and as a result, yes, there's a lot of darkness, lack of clarity. And even among Christians, there is that confusion. Many people will stand in the pulpit today and say very contrary things. That's just the reality, based on denomination or part of the world or whatever, the way they've.
Or their understanding or the light they've received. So
Yes, so they will say many different things that will be if you put all the sermons preached this morning together, you'd wonder what's going on. A smorgasbord of different things that do not all add up. That's just the reality.
Sometimes I feel like standing up in the meeting and just shouting out, Captain, what do you mean by that?
Do it.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
You can ask my dad, he'll do it.
All right, let's keep going.
And he might tell me what I can do with it.
And then he'll say, what, I can't do that.
Let's take a look at verse 5
Can I
somewhere.
add one element to that conversation right there?
Sure.
I think a lot of times, the words of the hymn writer, okay, I'm gonna be a little funny. The words of the hymn writer Mick Jagger come to mind. I can't get no satisfaction, and I've tried, and I've tried, and I've tried, and I've tried. And I see a lot of people coming into into our Christian faith who have not really experienced the shall we say, the sanctification or the separation or the relief from life's pressures, and before, as the Wesleyans would say, they prayed it through, they give up and look for additional coping mechanisms, medication, drugs, illicit activities, those sorts of things, and that's when I think we see Christians fall. I remember Bill Hybels saying, probably in the 4th year of his ministry, we were up the street in Crystal Lake, sometimes I don't even know if I'm saved. Bill Hybels, of course, no. But
outside of Chicago.
yeah, I don't think we get, some of us who don't get the complete infilling struggle, and we look for alternative modes of satisfaction.
End of sermon?
Period. You were so nice to me on the last one.
Yeah.
I thought, what's up with him? He's back.
I love you, John. You know that. Okay, question number 2. Verse 5. What did God tell the Israelites about himself in verse 5, as said, which is in the middle of the second commandment?
That he's a jealous God.
He's a jealous God.
Now, is it fair to punish the children for the sin of the parents? No.
So let me just try to save the day.
You go for it.
The covenant given to Moses in the wilderness for the 40-year journey and into the promised land was a temporary covenant until Jesus came and fulfilled the law. So
However, he came to fulfill the law and not change it in any way. So does that still stand?
I think that my statement might get some support that when Jesus did the sacrificial thing and became the Paschal Lamb once for all, that the entire sacrificial system was set aside, and we no longer are bound by the letter of the law. And when he was asked, which is the greatest commandment, he repeated from the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. You work it out, what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. You work it out what it means to love the Lord your God, which is why we don't enforce things like the Sabbath, even though we want to set aside a day, no one polices that. And there are other commandments like that. Worshipping stuff, no one preaches that. There are lots of things that don't get preached that if you went back to the letter of the law, you would find that a lot of us would stand guilty. I want Ellen to make her point, and then we come back to you.
May I comment?
Ellen had raised her hand 5 minutes ago.
No, how I interpreted that about punishing the children is that if you have a parent who is spewing hate and all negativity, the children are going to absorb that and they themselves will practice that. And I think that it would be up to the fourth generation for that to be diluted so that it would not still exist. That was just my interpretation.
Is that your interpretation?
Couldn't say it any better.
Yeah.
Okay.
What amazes me about that verse is that 1,000 generations, well, if you were to use a conservative estimate of a generation being 40 years, which is not OT, but new T, that would be 40,000 years. So is that how long we're going to be tarrying down here on the planet Earth?
Are we going to nitpick?
Okay, all right.
There's lots of words that, as I said, English has 25 times as many words as ancient Hebrew did. And ancient Hebrew did not exist at the time of Sinai. So a lot of stuff gets translated, and the translators get licensed to say, okay, what was the intent of this word? And if we will settle on that and keep going, then we say, well, you know, things get translated in multiple ways. And as a result, just trying to quell the
What do you say
controversy.
about my English Bible teacher? I don't know, what do you
Trying to
say?
quell the controversy, because the reason we have banks on a river is to prevent it turning into a swamp. How is that for profundity?
That's a nice anecdote.
Yeah, that's-
Sure, the
yeah, that's-
conversation goes on.
So we keep things within the boundaries, because if you allow them to go wherever they want to go, goodness only knows where you'll end.
So the second half of that verse far outweighs the first then, if it's just third and fourth generation for those that hate me, but thousand of generations for those who love me. That kind of weighs the verse.
Have you ever used hyperbole, exaggeration for effect?
No, a million times.
So I think that we could see some of this as license. And even as I thought about it last night, I kept thinking, when I speak, in the 40 years I've been teaching college, students don't write, but when I write, they write. And I sometimes ask them, can't you figure out how to take out of what I'm saying a sentence to write down? If I write it on the board, they all write it like parrots.
Yeah.
When I say it, they don't write anything. I say it's still just as important when I say it as when I write it. But they think if I write it, it becomes more important. The point then is that
Or it'll be on the test.
the point then is that as you look at commandments number
Worked for me all
2,
through training college.
look at commandments number 2 and number 4, according to the numbering system I've used here. Now, Commissioner Roberts, please allow me to speculate a teeny bit today. Please, please. Okay. I'm begging for permission.
Only if I can say, after you say whatever you're going to say,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Okay. So here's the deal. Some of the commandments are very efficient to write down. But 2 and 4 are very verbose. There's a lot of words there. And it's a good thing that Moses is not writing, but the hand of God is writing, because Moses would say, so what do you want me to write down? As you go, you know, all that lengthy paragraph on 2 and 4, some of them say 3 words. Do not kill, do not steal. And others go on like, don't make any graven image. And then there's an explanation as to what, and the history of that. And then on commandment number 4, remember the Sabbath. And then there's an explanation and a history and a future on what that is about. So what is Moses supposed to be writing or telling the people? All the entirety of the words here, or just the key words? Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, or don't make a graven image. I lost my train of thought. Oh, so I'm saying, oh yes, my point was, if Moses was to write, there's a lot of writing to do to make the point, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, and don't have any idols. All that to say, and I really lost my point now, that there's some things that are succinctly put, and others that are not succinctly put. And when you're thinking about it, all this ties into the idea of the language being used, 1,000 generations or 3 and 4 generations, because if you were to analyze it closely, you will start to see there's an inconsistency. That if you're going to love several generations, and one of those children hate, you're going to hear for many generations, the math will not add up. If I'm going to love the children of those who love me, or who obey me, but I'm going to hate multiple generations of those who hate me, then if my children, God forbid, were to hate, is the promise to love them because they're my children? And their children, if their children are to love, would the promise be to hate their children, even though their children love God? So the math of the statement doesn't add up. And that's why I think there's some hyperbole there.
Well, and there's a lot of reasons that people will consider biblical numerology. I mean, 40, how many times do you see that? 400 is 40 times 10. You know, I mean, there's a lot of symbolism behind the numbers that are used in the Bible, and that could be extremely controversial too, but.
So let me summarize what I just said. I don't know that a lot of this is to be taken literally. And this is why summarizing the 10 Commandments as love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself is a good practice for us in the 21st, is it 21st century? 21st century. We're in the 21st century, right? 21st century. As opposed to going back to follow the letter of the law. Ellen, you wanted to say something?
Well, yeah, in my mind, maybe it's because I've watched the movie so many times, Moses and the Ten Commandments, when the lightning was striking the rock that he was holding, do you really think that all of this was on there? I mean, it just seems like that would have been too much unless you're using like your font. But seriously, I don't want to mock this, but I know in Hebrew they don't use a lot of vowels.
No, I'm going to show you. This is what you're referring to. Moses with these two
Yes,
tablets.
right. I mean, it just seems like too much to have put on those.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if there had been some additions to the original.
Yes, Carol.
Chapter 31, verse 18. When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the testimony, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. Until then, it was Moses giving what God had said to him, and whether he felt that he should give a little more information, or if that was a verbatim replication of what God had said to Moses. You know, I think that we've gotten confused about when the tablets come down. I know I was. Because in studying it for the women's Bible study, I'm going like, you know, none of the scripture says, and God wrote on the tablets. And so I just now looked it up, to be honest. I searched it out. And I have it highlighted even. The tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God aren't until chapter 31, and who knows how much time went on between that. Up until that time, it was all just verbal.
I want you to think back to a time when you were year high and you nothing except that your granddaughter out of half of chocolate milk in her own.
Yeah.
Think back to a time like that and think about what parents are trying to do when they put rules and laws in place. They're trying to tame that water from being a swamp into a river, a conduit. They're trying to make something out of what would be chaos. So I think that if you understand what happened at Sinai, what God was telling Moses to tell these people who were just being released from or brought out of 400 years of slavery and didn't have any real identity because it was Jacob and his children who went down to avoid a famine, and 2 million people coming back 400 years later. So the idea of understanding who they were, I don't know was clear because it happened under some kind of captivity and exile. And you can lose your sense in another country and another culture where you don't get to say, okay, this is who I believe and what I believe. The reason we try to raise our kids in a certain culture and religious boundaries is so that when they get their wings, they will not stray too far away from the roots that we try to establish. That's, I think, what was happening. So now writing of the covenant is, I don't want to say treating them like they're children, but saying, okay, we got to go back to first principles. The same way a parent might say, okay, here's the rule and here's why you follow the rule. Later on, the rule can be modified, but for right now, the rule needs to be very definite. And that's why I think a lot of what is written the way it is. That's just my sense of things. Because, as I said, if you're writing these to apply to all the people all the time, some of them are very adult. Coveting your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's property, adultery, etc. So if you are writing a law that applies, you say, okay, but these laws need to make sense for the community. And those in the community who get to make the rules. Very frequently, laws are made when people are running afoul of a custom. If people are following the custom, there's no law. But when people decide to do their own thing, say, okay, we need a law to prevent people from speeding and causing my grandmother to run off the road. So we're going to say everybody drives at 35. No matter how good you can drive, you drive at 35. You're not driving at 60 because you're an expert driver. We put rules in place to, as I said, keep the river as a river rather than a swamp. Otherwise, we have chaos. So at that point in time, I think it was important to establish rules that, I don't want to say could be relaxed, but could be interpreted differently later on. And I'm meandering here, so I need someone to save the day for me.
No, but you're going right into the command of Christ. Greatest one is this. If you love your neighbor as yourself, you're not going to be speeding down that street and driving Addie's grandma off the road. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to be coveting certain things. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to be staring at all your images on your phone while they're trying to have a conversation with you. Sorry.
But when you're a child, you have to put more rules in place that say
Right.
letter of law,
Yeah.
not spirit of law,
Yeah.
because you will get pushed. The
Yeah.
child will push you and say, well, you know, I'm interpreting. No, you don't get to interpret it. When you're older, you can interpret it. But right now, just hold on to my hand and we're walking down the street in this crowd or the mall. I don't want you to get lost, so hold on to me. Later on, I'll let you walk by yourself if you can reach me, or text me and tell me where you are. But for now, the rule is hold my hand. That's what the covenant was about, I think, at that time. Again, I want for you to give me your own sense of things here. It's a lot of restriction that we do not necessarily follow letter of law. Let's tackle the Sabbath, which is question number 3. What was the purpose of the Sabbath? Question number 3.
To rest.
The purpose of the Sabbath. To rest. And what does that mean?
Well, to be like God, not like God. God rested after the first 6 days of creation. And he is holy, so we are, and he's told us later to be holy as he is holy. And I have to say, what is holy?
Set apart.
Well,
May I read 3 sentences from this morning's Lectio?
Thank you.
In his book Free Play, Stephen Nachmanovich argues that perhaps the most radical socio-political invention of the past 4,000 years was the Sabbath. The practice of the Sabbath, he says, recognizes that we need space and time reserved from rushing and pressures of everyday life, reserved for going inside ourselves for, watch this, rest, review, and revelation.
Love that.
Oh, man, I like that.
and how many of us do that on this Sabbath day of the week?
So my rephrasing of your question is, how do we,
I know it's not, yesterday was. Depends what calendar you use.
how do we do that? How do we tell ourselves we want to do that?
Can you do it for more than 5 minutes? I mean, you know.
Well, we do that by coming here.
Yes. So you put practice in place.
Sometimes.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not getting paid.
Oh.
No, it's teaching is a part of the practice. We say, we come and we assemble and we worship.
Well, officers get to take other days as their Sabbath because they work on Sunday. Is it really work?
You just want to be controversial today, right?
Well, I'm trying to help you today.
Oh, thank you.
So much that I normally say no to saying,
You know,
you're
I share
supposed to
the
have a
frustration.
filter.
It troubles me what New Testament Christians do with this. I've got a whole list of things I've gotta do today, and doggone it, I'm gonna miss the Lions game, you know? Whereas my Jewish friends, our Jewish guide had to leave the bus before and get home before sundown, and don't bother calling her because all of her technology is shut off until sunset on Saturday. I don't think we as New Testament Christians, and of course, we do have that reference, I believe it's in Corinthians, where he is our rest. So if you wanna play Monopoly with the scriptures, you take the rest and translate it to Sabbath, and you put it on Christ, you nail it to the cross, and you go watch the Lions game.
And do anything else you wanna do. Go
Yeah,
grocery
exactly.
shopping, go.
The clock on the wall says it's time to wrap it up. I love what is happening right now, and I wish that we could spend more time on this. I really honestly do, because I think we have to see that as 21st century Christians, we have more liberty than was being established when we were trying to say, okay, we need the water to stay within the banks so the river gets to where it's going, as opposed to a swamp. Now we live in a swamp,
Well, we live
unfortunately.
in a delta.
Okay, that was much nicer word.
But this
Yes.
is always-
I remember growing up, on Sunday, gas stations weren't
Yeah, things
open,
were closed.
nothing was open. If you were gonna go somewhere on Sunday, you better make sure you bought gas on Saturday. Or if you were gonna eat on Sunday, make sure you bought groceries, because nothing now,
Or you made
This
sure you had
world-
the address of the gas station owner.
yeah. And now, today's world, nothing is sacred anymore. I mean, starting right with life, you know, and respect for others. I think that we're more confused now about our morals than what they were back before Christ.
I'm kind of glad I didn't prepare for this lesson today.
I wonder about this. I think maybe it's twofold. The Sabbath is to honor God because He rested. He created us. And as you said, the world is so chaotic now. Maybe since He created us, He knew that to maintain our physical and mental and spiritual beings, that we needed a day to rest from the chaos so that we could be refreshed. And in Him, we are refreshed, and that we could go on. Now, in essence, maybe 6 days is all you should be able to go crazy and work. And on the 7th, you need peace. You need peace with God, with your neighbors, and resting and refreshing yourself and honoring God on the Sabbath. Maybe that's what it's all about.
I do think we need to add
Yes.
a little bit of our theology here. As New Testament Christians, and I know this is gonna rival some, we don't meet on the Sabbath. We meet on the Lord's Day. This is the Lord's Day. And each Lord's Day is a memorial of the resurrection day. And there are some extra biblical references to say that even Paul himself gathered with believers on the first day of the week, which we believe this to be, for worship and edification. And there are some references that say after that Paul went back to his tent-making practice on the same day, the Lord's Day. So I don't think we want to go as far as to try to declare Sunday as our Sabbath and close every gas station. It was a great practice, and boy, did I enjoy it, and I defended it as a Salvation Army thrift store operation. No, give me a day off. Give me a day off. Now, maybe I'd rather have Monday than Sunday based on donor traffic, but, give me and my team a day to refresh. And that's when we had all of our staff parties and all those kinds of things, and I don't mean to preach on that, but I do think we want to keep in mind that we as New Testament Christians are gathering on the Lord's Day, a memorial of the resurrection, not necessarily a Sabbath. And that's why Addie's working so hard, and I bought gas on the way here, and I might go out to the restaurant afterwards.
Rivers need banks. Otherwise, it'll be a delta, and I don't know what to do with the delta. Does anybody want to like add something profound to?
Too late for that.
Sorry.
No, I just had a question. If the Sabbath is your day of rest, why isn't God's day the Sabbath? The Lord's Day.
I don't know.
I think it's semantic, personally.
Well, I don't think so. I think the Jews celebrated their Sabbath on Saturday, and then they celebrated the Lord's Day on Sunday. That's
I'm
how
not
it's done.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but I think ultimately we are into a semantic idea if we understand the concept of rest
Right.
and the concept of reverence. I mean, what you read there, I wanted you to read it again. I think that we understand reverence. We get it. Adults don't play by children's rules. And I'm not saying that the Sabbath is a children's rule. I'm just saying that when you are mature, you say, okay, this fits into my life and this is a good thing and I'm going to keep doing it even when I don't feel like doing it because I know it's good. There are many Sundays I would prefer to stay home, but I know it is good for my spiritual renewal and refreshing and edification and the other R's words you use for me to be assembled with the believers. And what do I pray every Sunday? That we will say as we leave, that was good that we came. So you have to put some intention into that too.
Absolutely.
I intend for this to be good. I'm going to work at my worship. I hate to say that. Work at your worship. In other words, I'm going to say he is worthy. And I'm going to make sure that my presence of mind is there where I'm saying, Lord, you are worthy. I'm not going to let it happen around me. I'm going to involve myself fully in every act on that program, every act of worship. Lord, this is honoring you.
Right.
I want to be in it.
Good. Love it.
End of my sermon. Let's pray.